think we'll start with a discussion, just going back to the roots of it all, of this genocide ideology when it was first confronted, especially with Miss Florida, who worked, as I mentioned, who worked as a prosecutor at the ICTR. And I would like to just ask of her, from this experience, what patterns did you observe, or rhetorics and strategies used by genocide perpetrators in their defense at the ICTR, or even surrounding their prosecution? How do you see these strategies repeated, these patterns replicated and adopted? How do you see these parallel being drawn today?
First of all, at the ICTR, we had the biggest ideologues of genocide. We had the people who planned the genocide, and therefore the people behind what we see today, the rhetoric that comes out in denial came first from the defense of the ICTR, from what the key ideologues were actually using to defend their actions in 1994. So when you see the arguments that are used today by ideologues, you actually realize a lot of those were the defenses that were used at the ICTR. The first one is about the plane crash. That is usually the biggest defense. And how it was used at the ICTR is that they are not responsible for the genocide, because on the 6th of April, there was a plane crash where the father of the nation was killed by the RPF. And therefore what followed was spontaneous. It was people rising up and doing things. It was not planned, and therefore they are not responsible for the genocide. So when people talk about the plane crash, in fact, it's a way of shifting blame, but it does not explain the fact that the moment the plane crash happened, you see something that has been planned for a long time. There is no explanation for the Interahamwe having been trained, for the Impuzamugambi having been trained as militias, for the lists of Tutsi victims that had been prepared. It does not explain how the genocide immediately was put into action. Immediately you see roadblocks going up. You see key Tutsi figures being killed first, and then later on you see cabinet members being sent from the central government to go out into various parts of Rwanda to actually oversee the genocide. So today the ideologues, when they start talking about plane crash, they are literally trying to confuse everybody. The theory of double genocide, that started at the ICTR. So you create a moral equivalence, and yet we know that the only recognized genocide of what happened in this country that is both legal and factual is the genocide of the Tutsi. And you find some people actually talking about in subtle ways that are nuanced. But it was not only the Tutsi who died. So, while factually true, there are moderate Hutus who died, the reality is genocide has a specific definition. And when you look at it, it's a specific group of people, either ethnic, national, religious. So those are the people that are supposed to be, they are protected. And so what has been recognized is the Tutsi genocide. So when you say, but other people died, what are you trying to do? You're trying to say, since everybody died, there is no genocide against the Tutsi. And that started at the ICTR. When people use language of Rwandan genocide, it's not by accident. And ideologues, to be quite honest, they're very smart people. So when they say Rwandan genocide, That means Rwandans were targeted to be annihilated in 1994, which is not true. And so we must call that out. And that started also with the people at the ICTR. There's something that happens when they say shift the blame. When you're accused of genocide, go on the offensive and try the current government. And that is happening even when we are trying to get perpetrators extradited from different countries. They don't defend themselves for the most part. But what they do is try to make it about the current government. They are murderers. You don't know who these people are. And it happens all the time. So those are the subtle ways of how these things are done, and they must be called out. The most important thing to understand is that genocides start through ideology. That's how it begins. Prior to 1994, if the government in this country had actually stopped the ideology and not promoted it, we would not have had 1994. So to be very clear, it is not a matter that is to be taken lightly. So when ideology is accepted and taken lightly, and you are told it's not as serious as it sounds, to be honest, that is not true. We have seen in this country what ideology can lead to. So those are the nuanced ways that people must be aware and look out for, that started with the key ideologues but are continuing today with people in different parts of the world, and it must be called out whenever it happens.
Thank you very much. And there's a question that was asked of you, Florida, but I wouldn't want you to just have to repeat everything that you said on the international front. But I think the question that is really asked, if I'm paraphrasing you correctly, it's about, here in Rwanda, we have all these very far-reaching laws, but are they as far-reaching as they should? And in the implementation of these laws, when you're prosecuting these genocide deniers here in Rwanda, what are these major challenges that we're encountering? If you could discuss that quickly.
So the laws here are actually extremely clear, and the elements of the different crimes, denial, revisionism, minimization, the elements are very clear in there, and the jurisprudence that has come out of the courts is quite clear. But when it becomes international, and perhaps because the gentleman who asked the question is a student, I would like to elaborate to show how difficult it is, even for people who committed genocide, for us to get accountability when they are not within Rwandan borders. If there's somebody, for example, who committed genocide, who is suspected of committing genocide and is based, for example, in Johannesburg, the prosecutor in this country who is trying to get the suspect to be extradited has to understand the laws in South Africa, has to put an arrest warrant and an indictment in the language that is going to be used in the court of law in South Africa. In addition to that, the prosecutor in that country is the one who is going to go and argue the case in the court in South Africa. It's not going to be the prosecutor from Rwanda to go there and argue the case. The prosecutor in that country has zero information about what happened in this country. So now flip it over and make it denial. So imagine a prosecutor in this country sending an indictment in the Netherlands that says the words, that person is sitting over there, he's on YouTube saying cockroaches must be killed. And this prosecutor is supposed to understand it in their own context, because they don't know the context in this country. Sometimes those countries actually do not even have a law condemning this kind of stuff. The other thing that is a huge challenge is that in the countries where it's being perpetrated, the people that want to fight back are not equipped with the right information to actually call it out. I'll give you an example. There was a university in the region, I think it was 2 years ago. Rwandan students in that university organized a commemoration, and they sent an invite to everybody, including alumni, and said, we are going to commemorate the genocide against the Tutsi. One of the professors wrote back to everybody and said, be careful not to call it genocide against the Tutsi, because Hutus died and twice, not exclude other groups that died. And the students in that university obviously were offended, but they didn't know how to react. And if it comes from somebody of authority, it is likely to carry a lot of weight. So apart from ideologues that know the history of this country that are doing this intentionally, a lot of people that promote genocide, denialism, revisionism, and related crimes, in fact, are doing it out of ignorance, because they probably read Michaela Wrong's book or somebody like that, and they think they've figured it out. But on that group, there was an alumni, a student who had been to that university, who read this and decided to write back to everybody and create a teachable moment. And that is what people need to do. There are people that are in these spaces where this stuff is happening in the different countries, but I believe we need to equip them, to educate them with the right tools to be able to fight back. If you're fighting against denialism, against ignorance, but you yourself are not well equipped, you're not going to be successful in what you're doing. So those are the major gaps of what's going on internationally. But on the ground, because we have real life consequences, the investigators and prosecutors in this country take this seriously, and there are statistics which show different categories of these related crimes and how they are being dealt with in courts of law. So our laws are solid, and over time, because sometimes you get criticized using contexts in the Western world, you're using this to do I don't know what, there has to be an understanding that for us in Rwanda, we actually understand the consequences of this. You cannot use the context in Timbuktu to judge a context in Rwanda. Perhaps because of the history of particular countries, there are things that are condemned in those countries which we would not understand in Rwanda, because we don't know. It has not been a historical issue for us. But for us, denial, revisionism, and all of that, we know where it leads.
Thank you very much, Florida.